Evening. I'm sorry I shouldn't speak so loudly. I do apologise. I have a rather big chest this evening. Anyway, good evening and welcome to members, officers, and I don't see any members of the public, but of course they're always. Oh, thank you very much. Yes, well, yes, there we are. I'm going to hand over to the Vice Chair who will make an announcement, please.
Good evening, members and officers. In order to assist the process this evening, I must ask everyone to ensure that mobile phones are either switched off or on silent mode. We'd be grateful if they don't ring, because obviously we're being recorded and the sound echoes. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be filmed by the Council and broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. If you're seated in the chamber, it's possible the cameras will capture your image. By your presence, you are deemed to consent to be filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. As Vice Chairman of the meeting, the Chairman can, at his discretion, terminate or suspend filming if, in his opinion, continuing to do so would prejudice the proceedings of the meeting, or if he considers that continued filming might infringe the rights of any individual or breach any statutory provision. Finally, there's no planned fire drills for this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately via the emergency exit, which is to the rear of the room or back through the main door through which you came. I have another announcement, and that is a request by myself and the Chairman that when asking questions or debating an item, you keep your discussion as brief as possible. As the year goes on, our workload is going to become much greater and we need to be succinct to the point. And remember, we are looking at the risk factors. That is what we have decided as a committee we need to be looking at in order to add value to the things we scrutinise. Thank you.
If we go to item 1, apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Dalton Gibson and Councillor McQueen, and apologies from executive members, Councillors Beasley, Mrs Jameson and Walton.
I take it that Councillor McQueen is sitting in on...
Yes, apologies. It's Councillor McQueen substituting. It's Councillor Farrell. Apologies.
And please, wherever possible, through the chair and use your microphone. Sorry, as everything is recorded, of course. To item 2, we've just dealt with substitute members. Could we go to item 3? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I normally have somebody else to say that for me. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. And if we could go to item 4, please.
Chair, can I just highlight under item 4 that the minutes of the last meeting need an update to reflect that Councillor Marion Pope needs to be recorded in the attendance list. So if the committee is happy to agree them subject to that amendment, that would be good. Thank you.
Are we agreed? Agreed. Committee is agreed. Excellent. We shall move on to item 4A, which is then to confirm a record of that decision, which we've just agreed, and to consider the committee's action sheet circulated at 4B. Are there any comments on the action sheet? Since there's been no noting, can we thus assume that the minutes as amended are approved? Is that agreed? Thank you. Item number 5, public issues.
Thank you, Chairman. No public issues received.
Thank you. We'll move to item 6, which is the Local Government Reorganisation Programme update. And I'd like to invite Julian Osgathorpe. I hope I got that right. And sorry, I do apologise. Is it Osgathorpe? I am right? Correct enough. No, it's just that I have an unusual sounding surname, and I often do want to double check that we are pronouncing it properly. We'll lead with input from Councillor Broadhead. Thank you.
Councillor Broadhead, I'm happy for you to lead off and I'll follow on, or would you like me to go first? Okay.
I'll go first.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, is this just a general verbal update, or are we into the papers for the Shadow Executive Committee? We're on the papers for the Shadow Executive Committee now.
We are looking at the programme update on local government reorganisation, where I do feel perhaps the input from Councillor Broadhead may be quite useful, but again, I think he's passed it on to you to make the introduction.
Right.
Are we all happy to go straight?
Now that we're clear on
please,
what we
I
are and aren't
insist,
doing.
yes.
Okay, members, so this is the regular report to previously the Joint Committee, but now the Shadow Executive Committee on the activity that has been undertaken within the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Local Government Reorganisation Programme. The last update was given to the inaugural meeting of the SCC in July, and since that time, you will see from paragraph 5 onwards what's been happening. We are continuing to work with MHCLG in progressing the delivery of the consequential orders for the creation of the BCP Unitary Authority from April next year. We have concluded the service budget disaggregation work stream, and we are now working with our colleagues in the Dorset Council area on the next steps that was recorded in that Shadow Executive Committee meeting, which is focused around the disaggregation of the balance sheet, assets, liabilities, debt, etc. We are also working with our colleagues in the Dorset Council area and the Christchurch and East Dorset partnership on the TUPE list, which we're expecting to have available to us in the first draft later this month. There has been a lot of work happening in respect of the senior appointments, task and finish group activity. So we are in the process of the Tier 1 appointment timetable, and later this month we will start the Tier 2 appointments timetable. In paragraph 9, you will see a reference to the fact that the Financial Strategy and Council Tax Harmonisation Task and Finish Group is continuing to do its work, although lately that work is focused on the MTFP and the budget setting rather than council tax harmonisation itself. And the Governance Task and Finish Group, having achieved a significant milestone of the creation of the Shadow Authority and the Shadow Executive and the appointment of the interim officers, is now focusing on the development of those governance and constitutional matters for the new authority that will be required from April next year. In terms of phase 2 of the programme, the phase 2 delivery boards, all of the unit of service work streams are well and truly underway now. They are working very hard on developing a complete view of all of the issues and matters which require resolution in order to ensure service continuity through the transition from the preceding authorities to the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Unitary Authority, and we will be beginning to see the fruits of that work over the next 6 weeks. Finally, in paragraphs 12 and 13, you'll see perhaps the significant discussion point at this stage from this paper. For phase 1 of the programme, we formed a number of task and finish groups, many of which have completed their activity. And as we move into phases 2 and 3 of the programme, we're recommending we take this opportunity to decommission the task and finish groups that have been operating and commission new ones which better reflect the activity and the decisions and the work that will be required in phases 2 and 3. So in paragraph 12, you will see that we're proposing to decommission civic functions, council tax harmonisation, structural change order, disaggregation, the electoral review of ward boundaries, governance arrangements, visioning and process for chief executive appointment as task and finish groups. And we are proposing to create 5 new ones which will encompass all of the activity that the programme requires. And those are, in 13A, and having said this is what we're going to establish, I'm going to change the name of it. So 13A says vision. It's going to be recommended at the Shadow Executive Committee on Wednesday that it's organisational design and development. 13B is finance, which will pick up all of the aspects of the MTP and budget setting, as well as the council tax harmonisation, financial regulations, etc. 13C, governance. 13D, human resources. And 13E, civic functions, which will continue to focus on mayoralty and civic functions. And at that point, I'll pause, and unless Councillor Broadhead wishes to pick anything up, I'll respond to questions.
I think before we take questions, I'd appreciate if Councillor Broadhead could make some comments first, and then we could speak to it. Thank you, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Julian, for that very wide-ranging overview. There's a lot of work going on, as you can appreciate, and trying to condense it into a couple of pieces of paper probably doesn't do it justice. But I know we're all very well versed with the outline of the programme, but I thought it's just worth highlighting again, just for those that are not clear, what that Phase 1, Phase 2 and Phase 3 means. Phase 1 is the creating of the new authority, and by and large, most of that work is now done. There's some final work on some of the aspects of the parliamentary orders to mop up. There's the final work of the disaggregation work stream, but by and large, that bit's done. Phase 3, to jump to the end, is very much about the future designing and building the new authority, looking at that vision, the identity and the purpose. And as we've rehearsed in previous meetings, because of the very frustrated timescales, that ambition it has not been thwarted. It's still very much there, but there is a realisation that in preparation for the 1st of April vesting day, the focus very much at the moment has to be on the Phase 2 work, which Julian has taken you through, which are preparing the whole of the organisation ready for the 1st of April to make sure that we land correctly and services are prepared, continued without any adverse effects whatsoever. I thought I'd just bring out a few of the points that Julian has raised, just to give a little bit of a explanation from a member side on some of the things that have been going on. So the programme board, which is the officer-led team, is very much focused on that Phase 2 work and making sure that everything is together. And working alongside the programme board, we now have 5 delivery boards which involve the members of the Shadow Executive, and they are the Adults and Social Care team, the Children's Services Place, which is essentially in Bournemouth, it's environment and economy, and Poole is called place, but that mops up all of the other key areas. And then finally the corporate, which deals with the essentially the organisational side of things as well. So those member engagement is now happening. We've got those boards set up, and the members of the Shadow Executives are working closely with the officer teams that are leading on those delivery boards to make sure that everything is in place. And of course, shortly, as we move towards the end of the year, we will have to look at forming the budget for the first year of the new authority as well. So getting those services up and running, creating the new authority in the time frame we've got is a challenge, but I'm really pleased to report that work is now underway firmly, and it is progressing very well. And then finally, as Julian pointed out, the commissioning of the new task and finish groups, because a lot of the previous task and finish groups have now served their purpose, and the new task and finish groups, again, very much focusing on making sure that everything is in place for the new authority to land safely. So I wouldn't want to say by any stretch that the scale of the ambition for the new authority is not still front and centre. It is, but I think that the focus very much at the moment is on making sure that we are doing as much as we can so that the new authority serves its purpose and is as fit and proper from the 1st of April next year. So that's my summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. We've engaged with members of the panel prior to this meeting, and before we move further through this particular item, Councillor Marion Pope had a question regarding planning. And this might be a very good point, a place for you to perhaps bring this in, if you'd be happy to, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I can hardly hear what you're saying. But
I'll speak up. Okay, here we go. You brought in a question to be raised under this item, and before we go too deeply into this particular item, I just want to give you the opportunity to raise your question now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's appropriate, because I think planning would fall into stage 2 development. And I've asked this question in Paul, what discussions are taking place on the planning function post-vesting day, and I've received no reply. I cannot see that either the Joint Committee or the Shadow Executive has considered this matter previously, but I stand to be corrected. At present, all three authorities are at different stages in the preparation of a local plan to the year 2033, and Paul hopes to adopt a new plan before the end of this year. Developers are pushing for grants of planning permission ahead of local government reorganisation. That's fine. In the last month, there have been 2 instances of unauthorised excavations in my ward. Developers recognise that the lacuna in authority brought about by local government reorganisation are taking unilateral action to advance their developments. My question is, what discussions have taken place for the planning function in the new authority? And if none, when can we start talking about it?
Do we have an officer that would be happy to? Tanya Coulter, thank you.
Thank you very much. I can probably answer certainly most elements of your question. First of all, in relation to the plans, the local plans and the application of the local plans post-April 2019, the order that has already been made by Parliament came into effect on the 5th of September, provides that each local plan, as it exists at the moment, will continue to apply for a further 5 years post 2019, and there will need to be a unified local plan for the new council by 2024. So that's the first thing. So there will be continuity. So planning decisions in the new authority will be made in accordance with the policy and the plans that apply for the area in question. So if there's an application that comes through in Christchurch, then the local planning policies that currently apply in Christchurch will continue to have effect post April 2019. It will be then for the new council to review its position and decide how quickly and in what way it wishes to undertake the development of a new local plan. So that's the first thing, to provide for continuity. And we are in discussions again with MHCLG on issues such as how the SIL community infrastructure levy will apply, how the lists and the schedules will apply. So there are a number of discussions going on between officers and CLG as to how that order will be implemented. In relation to the function itself, there are, as Councillor Broadhead has said, delivery boards, and one of them is the Place Delivery Board, and the planning work stream within that. Planning work stream of officers is already looking at how the planning function from an officer perspective will be established from day one. And we've been discussing with them as legal and democratic officers how that will work in terms of the legal framework. So what do they need to put in place to enable planning decisions to be made lawfully? And the third aspect, I think, is then the governance around the member decision-making process. That is being discussed and will be discussed more fully once the Governance Task and Finish Group is established on Wednesday by the Shadow Executive Committee. As a legal and democratic officer work stream, we have been meeting over the last few weeks to establish how we project plan developing the new constitution and the governance arrangements between now and February. And we'll be discussing that with the members of the Task and Finish Group, and then coming to you as a Scrutiny Committee, and no doubt to planning members, standards members, and other members, depending on the nature of the part of the constitution being developed. But there will be some key questions that members will be engaged in, such as what does the planning committee look like in the new authority? What decisions will go to committee? What decisions will go to officers? And how will ward members be engaged? So those discussions are underway, and between now and Christmas, members will be more heavily engaged and included in that process.
I don't know if you have anything to respond to, but we've got two other members who would like to speak to that, and perhaps you might like to add some comments after. If
I
that
just
would-
wanted to thank Ms Coulter for her response. Thank you.
And speaking to this, we first of all have Councillor Spittle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like some clarification on what goes where. If I know the officers probably are aware, and also members on the executive, but if you could describe what services will be under the place and environment and corporate, etc., whether this is the appropriate time or whether it could be disclosed fairly soon, so that we actually know what we're talking about. Thank you.
This actually will come up later, not that we've actually rehearsed this at all, but I would like to think that the particular matter you raised there, we'll be able to deal with at a later point. And if it isn't satisfactorily dealt with, I'm sure we can discuss it at a later point. Next we have Councillor
Can I just say then, obviously, great minds think alike.
We have, first of all, Ron Parker, followed by Councillor Don McQueen.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm obliged to the officer for the explanation of the policy with regard to planning. I'm just wondering, with the regulatory role, can we assume that in the early stages we will have 3 separate planning committees, planning boards, and maybe the view later may be to restructure that in some way? But I think as long as we've got 3 local plans at different stages, clearly we've got to have 3 separate authorities are dealing with the day-to-day planning through regulatory process.
And no doubt what the new plan might look like. Tanya Coulter.
I mean, is it the intention eventually to have a complete local plan for the 3 authorities?
I think in relation to the first question, I wouldn't make any assumptions at all. And certainly from talking to the planning officers, they are well used and well versed in bringing forward recommendations to Planning Board and Planning Committee, to which a number of different planning policies may apply. So it certainly doesn't follow that because you've got 3 separate geographically based local plans that you need to have 3 planning committees. So I think those 2 things need to be separated. There might be arguments for having area committees or local planning committees, and there are arguments against, and that's one of the key decisions and key questions that needs to be resolved between now and the adoption of the new constitution. But certainly I wouldn't make any assumption on that front.
I'm sure, Chairman,
Would you be, again, use the microphone wherever possible? I'd like to make sure that your comments are recorded.
I'd say, well, thank you for the reply, and we should look with great interest to see how this new structure develops, bearing in mind that in the early days we've got 3 different local plans at different stages of acceptance.
Thank you for the clarity as well, Tanya Coulter. Next we have Councillor Don McQueen.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Coulter. Can I just clarify the development of the 3 local plans that's ongoing at the moment? It sounded from your answer that actually the existing local plans, which are different from those that have been consulted on, will continue for the next 5 years. And so I want to just clarify as to what's going to happen with those in development that are at various stages of completion. Are they being shelved, or are they actually going to be implemented prior to the new plan, for the combined plan?
I can answer that just purely by saying that's not a decision that can or has been made at this point. So the provisions of the order will state that whatever stage the current local plans are in development, by the time we get to April 19, that's where they'll be. And certainly it may be that the new council then decides to continue with the local plans in development, or may decide to pause them or do something else. So that is a decision for the new council to make.
Could I add to that, sitting on the steering group for planning in Bournemouth, it isn't a competition. It's about what's best for our individual areas at the moment. And the progress that we certainly have in Bournemouth, I can comment on. I don't know what the progress in Poole or Christchurch is, but I think the identity of local plans ought to be maintained and under consideration for the future. But I think the answer to the question is the current local plans are in place. Sorry, Councillor McQueen.
Could I just clarify? I know where the Bournemouth plan is because I, like my Councillor Ron Hornick, sit on the planning policy board. But Poole, I know, is further advanced. Is it expected that Poole's plan will be accepted prior to the new council then? Because obviously that's an important step as to what the new council will actually adopt or take over.
I think the answer is yes.
It's anticipated, but it's not guaranteed.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can move on to Councillor Mark Anderson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm concerned about the fact that we won't necessarily have 3 separate planning boards. I understand that officers will be able to cope with 3 separate plans, but I think you are putting a lot of onerous responsibilities on developers, members of the public and councillors to try and look. If you have someone from Christchurch sitting and looking at plans in Poole and vice versa, I think we should, as a panel, be stressing that our concerns that we should be looking, if possible, to have 3 separate planning boards.
I think again this might come up at a later point, Councillor Anderson, and at the moment I don't think it is necessarily something that this committee would be able to necessarily deal with, but it's certainly on the radar. If we could go to Councillor Claire Bath, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question with regards to the 5 delivery boards and whether those are purely made up of shadow executive members or whether the wider membership are able to be part of that process, because it seems like, as we've heard on many occasions, there's an awful lot of work, and I just wondered if it could be the load could be lessened for the shadow executive members by involving other members.
Again, you must have been a fly on the wall at our pre-agenda meeting. Which officer would like to respond? Julian?
I'm happy to, Chair. Just for the sake of clarity, and while I have no wish to correct Councillor Broadhead, there are actually only 4 phase 2 delivery boards. And in answer to your question, Councillor, the governance architecture for the programme clearly states that only shadow executive members are in the role of elected member oversight and liaison with those phase 2 delivery boards. What we have discussed previously with yourselves as representatives of View and Scrutiny is whether you wish to make a proposal to the shadow executive committee members for certain members of you to shadow those arrangements with their relationships with the phase 2 delivery boards, and I think that's something that we could perhaps return to at a later date.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to pick up on Julian's point as well, I think that would actually be very welcome. The current state of play is that because there is so much work to do in a very short period of time, Councillor Bath is quite correct. There's a lot of work pressure, particularly on the council officers and the team, but also as we move up to the date of trying to formulate the first budget, inevitably there will be difficult decisions that we've got to take. And as well, I think engagement, and as much engagement as we can generate, will be as helpful as possible. So whilst Julian's point is correct that the actual setup of the programme is that it's the individual shadow executive members that are day to day, if you like, meeting with the respective delivery boards, I think if Overview and Scrutiny did want to have some engagement within that, and maybe it's up to the group to decide how to do it, but maybe even have some of your own task and finish groups to directly engage with those delivery boards, I think that'd be very welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Before a question from the Vice Chair, I will indulge Councillor Ian Clark.
You're very kind, Chair. Just a couple of points on the council tax harmonisation. It says it's in paragraph 9 is continuing to develop and refine the information, and then it's sort of obviously coming to an end. I just wondered where we actually are and where I believe that's actually our final sort of efforts are going to be sent to central government, and they will actually make a final decision. Is that sort of correct as I read it?
I've been coached by my vice chair that this will come up in the next item, but you'd be more than happy to answer now if you like. Would that be all right, Adam? No, by all means. Please. Yeah.
I just want to make it clear, because I think we had this conversation at the last meeting of this committee. In paragraph 9, I need members to understand that the task and finish group that is referred to in paragraph 9 is not just working on the council tax harmonisation strategy. So where we say continue to develop and refine the information and assumptions, that also applies to the medium-term financial plan and the budget setting process.
If you'd like to add to it, or if you feel comfortable with the answer given already.
Well, shall I just expand on the answer then in regards to the BCP Shadow Executive on the 15th of June agreed a set of principles to be included in a letter to the Minister with regards to explaining our local preference. So we set that out in that Shadow Executive meeting. The latest position is we are waiting for the Minister to respond to that letter. We understand that we will get a response during the course of September, and then we will be given a period on which we can then respond to that, and then ultimately, having considered our response, the Secretary of State will then include the outcome of all that process in the finance order to be laid in mid-November.
Thank you. A right of reply, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Richards. So when we get the reply from the Minister, obviously it will go to the Shadow Executive. Will we as a a group be able, a committee, thank you, be any way involved in that, or because it's obviously it's a crucial decision.
I think my response would be we have to wait and see what that response says, because if it endorses what the Shadow Executive have actually already put forward, then that might be one outcome. But if it doesn't, then we might have to consider some of the alternatives that have been previously looked at. So we just really need to wait for that response, I think.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I really wanted to open up the conversation about the Overview and Scrutiny Committee starting up working parties, particularly with the view of working and overshadowing the delivery boards. The one we may particularly be interested in is the governance board, and following that and following the development of that, and looking at the new council constitution, particularly planning is going to really help. And I just wanted to get an opinion from the members, really.
Thank you. Councillor.
It's a very valid point, sorry. It is a very valid point that we need to be involved in that process, but I wouldn't actually prioritise one over another. I think they're all equally important, and there is a wide interest across members and members of the public in all these items, and I think it would actually be something that would have to be sort of running parallel on an equal basis. I think it would be very difficult to prioritise, but I think it's really essential to have that involvement.
Would you like to intervene? Councillor Broadhead, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just really a point of clarity, because I agree with the principle that more work shared the better, and actually the more that we're all involved in the decision-making process, the better as well. But to be clear, there are 4 delivery boards. So those boards are the Adults Board, the Children's Board, the Place Board, and the Corporate Board. What we're then going to be doing is subject to confirmation at the Shadow Executive this week, setting up the new task and finish groups, of which governance will be one of those. Now, I think, not that I want to speak on behalf of all of the members of the Shadow Executive, but the more that Overview and Scrutiny wants to get involved in any of the areas would be welcome. But there is a distinction between the delivery boards focusing on the Phase 2 delivery programme, and then the slightly future-looking task and finish groups.
Yeah, I think there's a particular intention also from members of also what might happen after 2019 in respect to the face of Overview and Scrutiny post the 1st of April. And I think that's an important area, particularly within that I feel that we could have some input. And I think there perhaps could be a possible recommendation that perhaps the vice chairman might wish to, vice chair, sorry, might wish to recommend. But before we go to that, do we have any other questions regarding this particular programme update? Would appear to be a no. I will. Oh, sorry, Tanya Coulter.
I just wanted to follow on before the move is made, to say that I think on the task and finish group that relates to governance and the new constitution, I think it is very important that you have overview and scrutiny members, a small working group, or members, how you want to set it up, working with the task and finish group and with officers, and directly engaging on that outside of your formal committee meetings, because time is so short. And that's on the development of the overview and scrutiny function, but actually across the board as well. And I think certainly as officers, and I know members of the of the shadow executive who've been involved before on the governance side, we would welcome that. That would be really helpful.
Again, this is the beauty of having an agenda setting meeting where we can kind of tease through some things on members' behalves. And if I could ask Lindsay to make a summary and then go to Councillor Smith for a recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I just wanted to input in relation to the design of ONS arrangements for the new Unitary Council, just to remind you that the support from the Centre for Public Scrutiny remains there to assist you in that. And just to highlight, as we've been discussing earlier, the time frame in which that would need to take place. If you are to input in that in the form of a working group, you'd need to be looking at that in the next couple of months. So you need to be working at quite a pace, meeting as a working group, and I'd recommend a similar amount as you would have in a task and finish group, so up to 5 members. And also drawn into the constitution is the fact that you could look beyond your committee if you wanted to other members who may have an interest in that working group. But if you wanted to consider that, that would be helpful to talk about tonight and determine tonight so that the work could commence.
Councillor Smith.
With that, I have a recommendation. Part 1 of the recommendation states that the Shadow Executive Committee be advised of the overview and scrutiny view that the work of the proposed Executive Task and Finish Group entitled Governance, to focus on the development of the new Council Constitution, may be strengthened by engaging with the Shadow Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the matter of overview and scrutiny design for the new BCP authority. Part 2 reads that this committee will establish a working group of up to 5 members in anticipation of undertaking this work.
Could we perhaps have a show of hands of those?
Have a seconder?
Oh yes, we need a seconder. Sorry, I'm just not used to this. Do apologise. Can we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Spittle. And could we also have a show of hands of those in favour of the motion? Sorry, do we have any abstentions? Or any objections? Thank you. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7, Parliamentary Orders Update. And Tanya Coulter, I understand you'll be leading on this item.
Thank you, Chairman. This paper, which is going to the Shadow Executive Committee, sets out the progress made to date in relation to a number of statutory orders or regulations that first of all provide for continuity of functions and enable the authority to be established and to be able to function from the 1st of April, and then a number of other issues. So if I go through it in some detail, because I'm conscious that when this came before the Executive Committee on the previous occasion, I don't think you had a meeting as a committee to look at it, so just to go through it. First of all, in relation to the miscellaneous order, as it's titled at the top of page 13, paragraph 6, these regulations are already in force, as I referred to earlier, in relation to the planning question. And they ensure that the existing orders that enabled previous local government reorganisations to take effect are updated. So they're updating on new legislation from 2009 to date. And they provide for the transfer of functions from the current councils to the new. So in essence, they ensure that anything done by a current council will be deemed to be been done by the new council. They provide that any policies and strategies and plans that are currently in place will transfer into the new council insofar as they affect that particular area. And some specific key policies as identified in that order are provided separately, and the new council will have to, as soon as practicable, or at least within 24 months at the latest, have a new harmonised policy. And that covers things like homelessness allocations policies, it covers licensing and gambling policies, and some non-domestic rate relief policies. So there are some specific policies that have to be reviewed quickly. And then it deals with the local plans, as I've already said. So the new council will have 5 years as a long stop date to have a new unified local plan for its area. So those regulations are already in force. There is, as Adam has already mentioned, a finance order, which is in the process of being drafted, and that will contain provisions relating to council tax harmonisation, and I think Adam Richards has already updated on that, and that is anticipated to be in force at the turn of the year. That's what we've been advised at this point. And then there is finally what is being termed an affirmative order, which is another order that needs to be made. This will go through a slightly different process in that, like the structural changes order, it requires a positive resolution within both houses of Parliament, because it is actually making a positive change to existing legislation. It will deal with things like the local acts. It will deal with statutory instruments where Bournemouth, Christchurch and or Poole are referred to by their existing names, and change them to Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. That will be the effect. So it will do some of the nuts and bolts around current legislation and making sure that that contains the right, or the correct name for the future application. It will also do things like change the membership arrangement of the Fire Authority. It will change the valuation tribunal's membership, just to make it clear that it's no longer Bournemouth and Poole that will be nominating, but it will be Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole. And then it will deal with any other bits of legislation and changes that we think need to be made. So it will be a washing up exercise. So if anything has been missed by the legislators so far, they'll be picking it up. Things like harbour authorities, area port authorities, the Lord Lieutenant, the High Sheriff, anything to do with the Charter Trustees and protecting and maintaining the mayoralties within the existing authorities will be covered within that order. So it'll be pulling everything together, and that is due to come in force in the new year. So it'll be worked on now, and that will come into force after Christmas. So those, other than that, the only other order that will be made is the one following the boundary review. So there'll be an order made to implement the conclusion of the Boundary Commission's review, to put into effect the new warding arrangements for the new council and for the elections in May. So that's a sort of summary, really. I'm quite happy to take any questions on any aspects of that. If I can just make one further comment to respond to a number of questions that have come in that's slightly off point, but it is relevant, I think, to the continuity provision, is that you and all other councillors of your authorities will continue to be councillors for the wards that you currently represent until 4 days after the election. This has been a question that's been put to me following the 31st of March. What status do current members have? Are they existing councillors, sitting councillors or not? Well, you are, and you will continue as a current shadow to morph into a new council with 125 seats until the elections on the 2nd of May or until the 6th of May, 4 days after those elections. So I just wanted to make that absolutely clear, because I know there are a number of questions have been raised about that.
Before we go to councillors' questions, there is also the element of PERDA at that point. Could you elaborate on that and how that affects from the 1st of April?
I can't remember the exact date, but it's late March, I think. And that picture has told me the date, I think 26th of March, but don't quote me on that. It's 20-something of March, PERDA will come into effect. it will affect the decision-making process of the new council in the way it affects the decision-making process of the current councils in that period.
Thank you. We first of all have Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report on the various orders that have got to go through Parliament. Can I ask about the situation of legal contracts with other legal bodies and what happens to those? Either they novated, are they assigned, or do they stand with the existing councils, and what legal status does the existing council legal entities continue to have?
They will be covered under the order that's already in place, the miscellaneous order, and that provides that any contract made by, for example, Bournemouth Borough Council with a third party will continue in effect as if it were made by Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. There's no need for a positive novation or an agreement or an assignment or anything like that. It will, as a matter of law, become a contract in the name of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole.
And just to be clear, that means that the other side of that contract, the other legal entity, cannot withdraw from their commitments in those contracts. They are purely passed on, and the courts will see it as such if there's a dispute, etc., without any further legal paperwork. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Dion.
Sorry, it's really just clarification, Chair. In terms of the order, especially as you say about civic roles and function, how does that fit in then with the task and finish groups and recommendations or findings in terms of how each authority or existing authority now wants to work that? Thanks.
So in relation to the civic functions, as far as the order is concerned, the drafting will reflect what the current councils or the shadow authority wants to put in there. So if Bournemouth and Poole want to continue to have a mayor of Bournemouth and Poole and do that through, that would be done through charter trustees being created and an order being made to set that up. That's the feedback we've had so far from members on that civic task and finish group, and that task and finish group will continue to develop that proposal, and that will be put forward to MHCLG, and that will be reflected in the order. So in a sense, that's a local choice option for us to put forward.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Parker.
Sorry, should I just say
by
that I omitted Christchurch in that purely because I know that's been dealt with under the community governance review, or be dealt with through the parish town council process.
You've covered yourself there since we're being recorded. Thank you. Councillor Parker.
It's really a clarification, Chairman. With regard to the charter trustees, there will be a cost in running these. So how would that be financed? Have we given thought to if that's sort of finance on an individual basis, like Bournemouth supporting theirs, Poole theirs, or is there a sort of a pot for all the charter trustees? Have we got that far, Chairman?
I have no idea, but I feel as though Tanya Coulter has the answer.
I can't answer how much it will cost, but there would be a precept. So charter trustees will, as in Christchurch, there will be a precept for the town council and the other parish councils. There will be a precept for residents that live in the current Bournemouth council area for the charter trustees and the mayoralty and the associated costs of that within that area. So as to how much that will be, at the moment we're working through that, but it will be on the it will be itemised as a precept.
So in effect, Chairman, there'll be 3 separate precepts.
Thank you. I think there possibly could be. Adam Richards, I think you'd like to add to that.
Sorry, I think it's likely to be more than 3 because at the moment you've got the police, you've got the fire, you've got the potential BCP unitary authority, and then potentially you've got a charter trustee precept, but then also in other areas you might have the town precept as well. So, you know, potentially it's more than just 3.
Thank you very much for that. Before Councillor Brooke put his arm up, I did see Councillor Bath with her hand up first.
Same question. But no, actually, it's a very, very small question. I probably should know the answer to this already. But the Boundary Commission review, have we got a definite date as to when they're coming back with the ward boundaries for the new council?
The most up-to-date information I had was that it was going to be in October, mid-October. But I can clarify that for you and follow that up and come back to you on that.
Councillor Brooke, thank you for waiting, and then followed by Councillor.
That's quite all right, Chair. Just to clarify on the precept issue, the mayoral situation at the moment is that it comes down to existing council tax, not a precept. So if it's being a precept, that is actually going to be added on to the council tax, which makes a suggestion that the current council tax will not get adjusted prior to the precept being added on.
I think you may make a very valid observation.
I certainly wouldn't make that assumption at this moment in time. We're in discussions with COG asking for clarification.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jane York.
Just to say that the boundary review, if it goes with the Boundary Commission review, will end up with splitting some current wards, namely mine, into, so Bearwood is currently in Poole, but it is going to be across two boundaries, so that would just put that in the melting pot.
Tanya, would you like to respond?
The way in which we understand that will be approached at the moment is that within the order there would be specified, for example, charter trustees for Bournemouth will be made up from all members who represent current Bournemouth wards as they are now, and any that were predominantly or in the majority within Bournemouth prior to the boundary review. That's non-legalistic words, but words to that effect. So in a sense, if there were a change to the ward, but it remained predominantly within the Poole boundary, it hadn't changed so much that all of it was moved into Bournemouth, remain members of that ward would remain charter trustees for Poole. Can't be charter trustees for both.
Well, I don't think there are any recommendations we need to make to this in particular, but are there any further comments from members of the panel before we move on to the next item? Wonderful. Could I hand over to Lindsay for item 8, Overview and Scrutiny Committee Forward Plan?
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a number of various elements to discuss in relation to this item. Given that the full plan that's before you is what's been drafted based on the workshop that was held with members in August. So the full plan attached to your agenda, it's important to note very much that it's a draft and it's for you today to discuss, amend, add to, and then confirm it. But before we actually move on to the full plan, I don't know, Chair, if you'd like to talk through another couple of elements in relation to how members might obtain information to assist them in their scrutiny role.
Thank you. First of all, thank you those members that took time to respond to my emails and telephone calls last week. And I think what we've learned is that we all have an awful lot of expertise and interest in how things are moving forward. And there seems to be, this is unrehearsed, we are looking at the safe delivery of a new council on the 1st of April and the risks associated with it. We all have other matters and issues that may not be necessarily associated directly with it. And what we need to do, I think, is tease through those items. And what we'd like to bring forward is a pre-committee session. So the questions and answers that we've had via email, we can actually tease through prior to a meeting, and we can actually then use it as a means of actually doing a bit of forward plan working. Any questions that perhaps don't need, not that they don't need to be asked at the major meeting, but perhaps they can give you the direction that you might need to solve those problems. It may not be our committee that needs to deal with it. It may be your own local authority or your local scrutiny and overview panels. So I'd like to use this as an opportunity for briefings from officers on issues raised by scrutiny where further information is required. The purpose of the first session would be from around about 4:30 p.m. prior to the next meeting to allow time for discussion of issues already submitted to the chairman. So I gave you all the added on drivel, and I'm just reading it from a sheet of paper. If this session is well received, it can continue prior to future meetings, probably from 5 to 5:45. And I'd just like to get a measure from members, and we certainly will be getting officer support as well. But I think it would be a valuable asset for us to be able to utilise and make the little time that we have as most valuable as possible. Do you all agree? Only for the first one, but if we need, okay, so if that's, the fact that we need to adjust the timings of our meetings, but I think the value of having that pre-meeting it will be invaluable for the efficiency of the panel, so we can get straight to the point at these recorded meetings for the basis of the public to see what we're doing. But I take your point on board, Councillor, and of course, these will be open not just to ourselves, but other members too. We want to be as inclusive as we possibly can. And when I did stand for chairmanship of this panel, I think I did say it isn't just about us, it's about everybody else too. So, we can be very inclusive in that. But as an experiment for the first meeting, if we were to then suggest a 4:30 appointment, if you do have any questions prior to that and are able to attend, you're more than welcome to put those in writing in an email prior to that. So, in theory, are we all in agreement? Yeah, no show of hands required. That sounds like. Councillor Wakefield, do you want to speak to that? No. Not acknowledging. Okay. The next item to look at are links with the executive. Now, we spoke about and I think this is where the confusion was with 5 and 4. There are 5 working task and finish groups, and there are 4 service delivery boards. So the suggestion is that we propose rapporteurs. That's a very posh word for, is it a posh word? No, it's a rapporteur. We should all know what that means. Who link with each delivery board and make those informal links. This will be for regular conversations and ONS members to take the initiative to maintain the link, reporting back to this committee where they identify matters that require scrutiny. Now, members will need to think, this is, with everything we're going through, you're going to start looking at the time that you're going to be able to allocate. So members will need to think about capacity to undertake this informal work, along with the experience that you bring. So think about that, please. It may well work for 1 or 2 members with experience of a service area, and maybe buddy up with somebody who perhaps doesn't have that experience but has a different set of eyes, and it can be very useful in that way. And it would also perhaps encourage training for those members perhaps who are less experienced to then cascade that information to other members as well. Now, it doesn't need to be restricted to our panel. So if we were able to recruit from the panel in the areas of the Adults Board, which would be supported by Councillor Blair Crawford, Councillor Karen Rampton and Councillor David Flagg. I'm not suggest. Well, I might want to suggest that we volunteer today, but
how does the committee feel about the process?
yeah. Oh, sorry, I was just getting carried away. Thank you very much. There's me again flying off at a tangent. What do you reckon on that, members? Any comments or questions? Oh, right. We'll start with the vice chair and then work round the room.
Personally, having never been involved in adult services, children's services, I think it would be very useful. However, I would obviously need to buddy up with somebody who has a lot of experience, having no experience in it myself. So I personally think it would be very useful.
Have any comments around the room? Councillor Bath?
I was pretty much going to say the same as Councillor Smith, that certainly coming from Christchurch, for members here who have no experience in those areas, I think it would be really useful for some of us to get involved in those areas and to learn exactly the decisions and what happens within those departments. So yes, I think it would be great.
Councillor Spittle.
Yes, to make the three, and surprise, surprise, yes, I too would welcome briefings or further information about adult and children's social services in the separate departments.
Councillor Dion.
Yes, I see the value of the involvement, obviously, but I think if the time and effort that's invested, I would be asking what the influence would be, and basically, for want of better words, is it worth the effort? Is it actually going to make a difference? Or is it sort of, in a way, tokenism of just sort of going, you know, yes, sure, whatever, because I don't see a huge amount of, from members representing, in a way, members not on this committee, a great involvement in terms of, you know, other extended sort of members. And so I would see this as a way of getting involved, because there is a huge amount of expertise amongst members across all the councils, all the authorities. And I'd like to see that tapped into if it was going to influence or make a difference, because the expertise is quite enormous.
I think one of the things that I've been always passionate about is adding value. Chairman Paul would like to speak, and then Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was struck at the beginning of your meeting about some opening remarks about identifying risk that you could review through your committee's work and therefore add value. I think this is a way you could do that. So if you had maybe 2 members of your committee, or possibly 3, who were looking at, let's say, children's services, by way of example, but all 4 delivery boards, what you could do is, in your report back, the 2 or 3 members of your committee back here could report back on some of the risks around a safe delivery for day 1 of those particular services, with any recommendations you might have about some further scrutiny work on your forward plan, and, you know, requesting specific details and specific reports to assure you that risks are being managed and mitigated. That's how I would see you'd be able to add value to the process.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to be clear on the delivery boards, they are actually officer-led. They are chaired by officers and not by the relevant members of the executive. So the role of the executive members that have been allocated to the different boards is as a liaison contact, so that the shadow executive as a whole have a complete picture of what's going on in all the various different boards, to give you the entire picture. So just as another point of interest, several members had expressed interest in going on adult social care, because they felt that it would be an opportunity to learn more about adult social care. So 2 things, Mr. Chairman, is a reminder that the next seminar, which is on Wednesday evening, is on adult social care. So I would encourage everyone who has an interest in learning more to attend, and also to perhaps make the point, which members of the panel may wish to consider, is that because we are very short of time, the nature of the work that would go on in the delivery boards is actually at quite a pace. So you may wish to consider whether it is actually a place to actually learn about a particular service area, as opposed to actually see the work that's ongoing in order to ensure safe delivery of services on day 1.
Yeah, I think one of the things is, from a scrutiny perspective, is risk is the thing that is coming out for us time and time again. Councillor Smith.
I just want to come back. I think part of the point of this is not to necessarily shadow the board, but to make informal links with the people on those boards, so that we can get to understand what they are finding out. So rather than shadowing the work of the actual board, it's making those informal links so that we can then report back and see what risk there is and how the members of those boards see the risk.
Councillor Wakefield.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Gillian will help me on this one. But in Bournemouth of late, we've been looking at the risk registers within children's services. And I think that exercise has actually been quite useful, moving the service forward as it is at the moment. So I think, as you're suggesting, looking at all the 4 different delivery point areas, as far as our engagement with all of those, this is a really good way forward. One, to get us engaged, one, to engage with the officers, and to challenge the officers looking at that risk register as to what they are doing to overcome the particular risks that are being highlighted. So I totally agree with it, Chair.
Well, I'm glad you agree. We're looking for volunteers shortly. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with sort of the idea. But I think we need to have people who really understand the area that they're looking at, so they can understand what sort of problems might arise. So they're much more likely to actually to be able to see through it. It's not really a time. I don't think it's a time and place for learning on the job, so to speak. In my view, I think there are other places for that. It really needs people who are much more expertise in this particular area, because they're more likely to see where any problems might arise.
I would hate to refuse an enthusiastic person that has some vigour, but I take your point. You're quite right. It does need some expertise. Tanya Coulter.
Just following on from that, I think that's a good point, and I think that needs to be there in some way. But I also think there's a lot of value in the sort of scrutiny process of people asking questions that might appear too obvious. And I think there are, Lindsay, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly from my perspective on scrutiny, I think you can elicit different things if you're coming at it from a different angle, or you're not ingrained in the service or the function. So I think there's benefit in both. So I think sometimes those questions that maybe where assumptions are made, if you're involved in the service or are an expert, you get questions from a different angle, it can be really valuable.
Yes, I must confess to having the very same issue when I'm dealing with certain areas in my scrutiny panel, that I feel, I must be the expert. But as I say, there we are. So do members agree? And are there any volunteers? Now, bearing in mind the four areas rather, we've got the adults board, the children's board, the corporate board, and the place board. Whilst we're here this evening, are there any volunteers? I saw Councillor Anderson putting his hand up first.
Chairman, I was just going to say, as we have several members of the panel being substituted, it would be better if we got the clerks to write to the members of the board outside the meeting and ask, rather than have volunteers here.
Lindsay, would you like to follow up on that and wrap up, please?
Yeah, just to say, Chair, if the committee's happy, I can go out to the committee members, but also wider than the committee, to all members of BCP that aren't executive members, to see who would like to get involved and, really importantly, has the capacity to do that work. But that doesn't preclude anyone from showing their interest, I think, here, just for expediency, so I know.
Are members comfortable with that? Because I think we need to tap into the expertise and the enthusiasm, and with so much going on, if we can delegate to those, that can give us the focus to perhaps pursue some other matters too. But that doesn't. Councillor Bath.
As somebody who would like to volunteer, it would be useful when you send out invitations to people to show their interest, if you could give us a bit more idea as to what is under those headings, what areas of work there are, because there's some very broad headings, and it'd be useful to know that before we decide. I completely
agree. I think again, we've discussed them briefly this evening, and it's gone in one ear and out the other with me as well. So I totally take that on board. Sorry, who else did we have? Councillor Wakefield, followed by Councillor Parker and Councillor Pope.
Well, you were asking for volunteers, Chair, so obviously I'll volunteer for children's. Thank you.
Okay, that doesn't mean that you can't volunteer for Children's. Doesn't mean that Councillor Wakefield's got it. Councillor Parker.
I'm anxious that this work feeds back to this group, so presumably there will be a direct feedback from those participants in the 4 working groups.
Absolutely, that's the crucial element, is that it then gives us greater efficiencies, that we're relying on member input rather than, our own members to scrutinise, and I do hope it'll become a very efficient way of moving forward.
I'm just wondering, to what extent we would involve voluntary groups at a later stage, because I think it's absolutely important, particularly with social services, to learn from those groups and to monitor whether in fact we've had a seamless service.
If anybody does have... Oh, sorry, Julian.
I think it's too early in the process for that, Councillor Parker. I think we need to run through the process that we've discussed tonight with your inclusion and engagement to get to a point where, as an authority, as an emerging authority, we are reasonably clear of what our service offering will be as BCP, and I think then we engage and consult with external bodies.
I'm happy with that, Chairman, as a long-term objective.
Thank you. Another matter I just want to alert members to is that if necessary, the committee, would you be happy to delegate this to myself as chair to then organise and delegate those responsibilities? Would that be acceptable? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Right. Sorry. Oh, I do. I'm so sorry.
Again, Chair. I just wanted to volunteer for place if they are going to look at planning for the new authority, because I shall be able to pick up what is going on and feed back to you all.
Well, I did say that Councillor Wakefield was on the short list. I'll definitely make sure at the top of the list for that. Okay, thank you. And sorry for forgetting you. Do apologise. We're moving on now to the forward plan. Lindsay, could you talk us through that, please?
Thank you, Chair. As I said earlier, the forward plan document at the end of your agendas is the draft that's been based on discussions you had at your workshop. So it might be helpful to go through that and agree the items. There are some additions that have come up and changes to the executive forward plan on which a lot of this is based. And there's 1 or 2 items where I think a little bit more explanation is needed. So if I take you through the forward plan and then you can confirm how you feel about it. If you look to the October meeting, you have listed the programme update, which is what you've had today, the standard programme update. And in addition, at your workshop, members identified they would like to look at the programme resources item. They felt that was important with their risk focus, so that came to committee. And also the consolidated medium-term financial plan update for the same reason. Are members happy to confirm those items for October? Yeah.
Basically, if anybody says no, then we'll, just, okay, thank you.
In addition to those items, on the executive forward plan, there's now also an item relating to the delegation of the waste function, listed for October. I don't know if officers can give a little more detail so the committee can understand whether they would need to scrutinise that item or not.
Thank you, Lindsay. This is the decision or the discussion followed by a decision that's required in order to ensure the continuity of the service to Christchurch residents carried out by the Dorset Waste Partnership and the basis and term upon which that will be extended.
Members happy with that? Good. Do we? Well, this is now down to risk. Councillor Smith.
I do feel, obviously coming from Christchurch, that I would assume, but maybe we need to check whether this would be scrutinised by the Christchurch Scrutiny Board, and then potentially they could report back to us, and we could go from there maybe, rather than having it as an actual item on this scrutiny panel.
Councillor Anderson is itching to make a comment. Councillor Anderson, before anybody else, go on.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to say I thought this would be something that would fit nicely under your place raconteurs. Obviously there's Councillor Pope, and the reason I haven't volunteered is I want to discuss this with Councillor Malcolm Farrell, who's my equivalent on pool, and see whether the two of us want to do it or whether one of us or how we do it. So, but again, that I think would fall into very much into our sort of remit.
Well, I think that's taken on board as being an item for the forward plan. Any other comments? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that your role is to scrutinise the executive of the Shadow Authority, and as this is on the Shadow Authority's forward plan, you're well within your rights to scrutinise it. If other bodies of other councils look at things as well, I think that's a separate thing. But I think you would look at it in your own right if you choose you want to. I think it's more about the question of, do you feel that it's a high risk area that you need to look at and use your valuable committee time to look at, or would you like to ask someone from the place area as a rapporteur to go off and have some informal discussions? And there's quite a few nods to that proposal. Yeah.
Tanya, I think you wanted to reply.
It was only just to suggest that I think if you as individuals are working with the place delivery board, ascertain that this issue is a particular sort of high risk issue, then you can bring it in through that process rather than as a result of it being on the forward plan in the executive committee, I think. Because it shouldn't be, hopefully it should not be a high risk issue. It should be about preserving continuity. But if there are issues around it that come to light, then you would be able to bring that in.
Well, thank goodness that we set up that little bit earlier that deals with that. It's as though this has been scripted, ladies and gentlemen. Councillor Spittle?
This might not be relevant, but you hate that. I'm just wondering, we've talked about the DWP. What about the Star Valley and Pool partnership? How is that going to be scrutinised at all? That deals with rates and rate collections, etc.
We've got very many volunteers being volunteered. Councillor Haynes, you happy?
Yes, I can give you just a brief response to that. My understanding is that originally the SVPP, as I call it, they were going to become Dorset-wide, but that's now been put on hold. And it's just going to continue as it is with the current arrangements. So other than having to issue new council tax bills, the operational side of it isn't really going to change very much.
I will agree with Councillor Haynes. The only thing I'd add is the fact that this is an evolving process. So if anything changes, then I think we would then report that back through the normal processes. But that certainly is where we are at this moment in time with regards to the partnership principles, which says that actually if there is a currently partnership in place, we keep it in place for 12 months. And there is under that, therefore the Star Valley and Pool partnership should stay in place for 12 months. But within that, there will be a lot greater working between SVPP and Bournemouth, because Bournemouth's Regular Benefits is not currently part of that partnership.
Can I just thank the officers for that, and also May, because I was aware, I was actually on one of the committees associated with the SVPP, and I wasn't aware what the situation was with Bournemouth, but Adam has just clarified it. Thank you.
Happy. I'll just now pass over to Lindsay.
If I just take you back to the forward plan to November, you've got the programme update and the parliamentary orders update, so in fact mirroring what today's agenda was. And then December, if there's no comments there, your programme update, local council tax support scheme. You have said at a previous meeting that you wanted this one to come back, I think, and discuss the fact that you could add some value to this item. Consolidated medium-term financial plan update, you've said you want to receive all of those. That's a total of your December items currently. Oh, Tanya Coulter would like to input.
I think just to follow on from that, it's likely that we would be wanting to bring forward a sort of formal scrutiny process of the new governance and constitutional arrangements to that meeting, to the December meeting. But obviously you're working with the Task and Finish group will inform that, but at the moment on the timeline we're working to, that would be quite a significant part of that meeting potentially.
I've made a note of that. Moving on to January, programme update, council tax base setting. You've said you wanted some more information on that to determine whether you needed to bring it to committee. Adam has supplied that information and I put it round the tables and circulated it today. I don't know if you want to have a quick look at that and ask any further questions you may need to determine whether you want to look at that item.
You may wish to come back to us on this, because again at our next Q&A session, because there were some questions regarding just going through some notes that I had earlier, things like, for example, exceptions and things like this with council tax. Is that relevant to this particular issue? No. Adam,
if I can just clarify, the notes that you've got by way of further explanation seeks to just explain the fact that the council tax setting report is a very technical based report where we actually calculate the bandy equivalents and then provide that for the precept. It isn't a report that, you know, certainly from an officer of section 151 officer for Bournemouth and Poole, that I am aware of being scrutinised in the past, because it is seen very much as a very technical report. But it's up to members if they wish to go into the details. But it's not the report of which any discounts or premiums are set, because actually generally we set those in the cycle before, so they've already been predetermined.
Just because it hasn't been scrutinised before, what's the risk element if we don't?
The risk, in the sense that I think that's probably one for further consideration, but generally in the past it's been considered to be a low risk item because it has been very technical in nature. It is a matter of just A plus B divided by C equals Z, that kind of situation.
I'm comfortable with that. Councillor Anderson, followed by Councillor Wakefield.
Thank you, Chairman. I was basically going to say the same sort of thing. I went and saw Mr. Richardson last year about this, and had quite a long conversation with him about it, and he explained it all to me. And it's very factual. I don't think we can invent properties in Bournemouth, and the calculations are mathematical calculations, and I'm not sure how anything can go wrong unless Mr. Richards makes an error in his maths, and I really don't think he will do that.
Perish the thought, Councillor. Councillor Wakefield.
Ditto. It's not something that we can change, so therefore I can't see the value in scrutinising it unless, as has been suggested, the math is wrong, which I would doubt very, 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 very much that is going to happen.
Well, I think that's a successful thank you very much, and we look forward to the bill. Another thing off the list, over to Lindsay.
February meeting, programme update, medium-term financial plan update. You had listed the appointment of external auditors with a question mark, needed more information. Again, I've put that round the room, and just to highlight that that is coming off the executive forward plan, so there's no longer really anything for you to scrutinise there. So I assume you're happy to also take it off yours.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The March meeting, this is your last listed meeting. You'd have your programme update, and then there's a proposed item of preceding authority scrutiny headlines. That is an item that I'm recommending so that each scrutiny body of each preceding council can put forward brief headlines of what they've looked at, what they're currently monitoring, what's on their radar, so that that funnels through you to the new authority so that nothing's lost. Are you happy with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then moving on, other scrutiny, there's a working group suggested on risk. This is there for you to consider whether you'd like to set this up. Bournemouth did run its own working group before you joined together in this committee, looking at the risk register. So sitting down and getting full detail on it and understanding it, and again being able to elevate any issues as appropriate to this committee.
Could I just perhaps suggest that's something we could pick up in the pre-formal meeting briefing, should you require it, rather than constituting a working group to do so, in order to expedite things.
And then just to recap on, pre-committee sessions is listed there, as we discussed earlier in the meeting. And to recap on the discussion around ONS design inputting to the governance task and finish group. If you're happy to set up that working group, that would need to get going fairly soon. So if there are any volunteers here today that want to get involved in that, that would be useful to take note of, in addition to going out to the full non-executive BC membership. But I would suggest you don't go for any more than about 5, because it won't be able to be as agile as it needs to be, and it will need to meet quite a number of times in a short time period, so you need the capacity to do that.
Happy with that. I think we've summarised everything. We'll start at that side. No, we won't. Councillor Wakefield, then Councillor Clark. I changed my mind.
Just putting my hand up to volunteer again, Chair. Gosh, I want to roll this evening, don't I?
Thank you. Put him down on the list. I think he's volunteered for that. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Spittle.
Yeah, a general point on the forward plan. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts with the going forward, and probably there's a lot of things that we probably will need to bring onto the discussion in each meeting, and probably from the sort of raconteurs or whatever group that we set up. I'm sure some ideas can come forward through them and onto the committee if needed.
I'm sure it'll become a regular agenda item. Councillor Spittle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the past, my speciality has been housing. Presumably that will be dealt with under place.
We're having a nod of agreement there for those
Yes,
watching
it
in
is.
black and white.
Yeah. In which case, yes, I would like to be considered to go on to the steering group or the working group.
And Councillor Bath.
Well, as I said before, I'm happy to volunteer for one of them, but until I've got what's underneath the headings, I'd like to wait and see it.
Again, I would like to give preference wherever possible to members of this panel, but be conscious of time that you have as well. But this is very important. I understand that Jane Porn would like to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just going to make a suggestion as Lindsay is compiling the forward plan, that actually you record the outcome of your discussion, in that you have agreed, I think in principle, to have a formal feedback from that work with the 4 delivery boards, even though you're working informally with the Shadow Exec Committee members, that actually you formally have a note on your forward plan that you'll be receiving the feedback. And maybe it might be worth, Lindsay, just crafting a kind of guidance note about what sort of feedback will be most helpful, because again, going back to your key issue, it's about risk mitigation and management. So, and the confidence you have as scrutiny members as the extent to which risks you have seen and have been identified are being managed and mitigated, and where you feel there's quite a high risk area, that actually it might be a recommendation coming forward from that work, that at the next meeting of your committee that particular issue is brought forward for further scrutiny. So I just think if Lindsay could kind of craft some guidance note so that people are clear about the work that's going on and the reporting back, and then the next steps should there be some high risk issues that you believe this panel should have a look at, and that could then continue to feed into your forward plan.
There was also, I recall at our agenda setting meeting, this idea of a newsletter with frequently asked questions that we can funnel through, and the process by which we communicate. We need to have a central, not just copy in, it needs to come through the chair and through democratic services, so we can then all see what we need to look at. Kindly, many members, for example, just emailed me personally, and I had to then email it to Lindsay. So I would encourage, when emailing or whatever process we adopt, that you're copying in Lindsay and myself to make sure that we can then collate all that information and feed it back, because those items that aren't necessarily relevant for our panel, we can deal with, our committee can be dealt with very quickly through the newsletter and feedback to you individually as well.
So members will be aware that we have a Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council intranet now that's available to everybody. We're trying to develop it to be a kind of one-stop shop for everybody. So if you need some information, you're looking for some dates or some further information about how things are going to be taken forward, it's all there. We've got a focus now on a monthly members newsletter. They are also on the intranet, but the feedback that I have received to date is that a popular aspect of that are the frequently asked questions, that members find those quite helpful. So Lindsay's very kindly forwarded the questions that your panel have already raised, committee, and I'm then going to select the ones that seem to have the more general interest, rather than them being sort of niche questions, and build them into the next newsletter. So I've got an arrangement now. If you keep doing that, I will then be able to start building those into the members' newsletters on a monthly basis, starting this month. So thank you for that. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Can I just comment on that? One of the things we do want you to do is encourage the other members of the Shadow Authority to also ask questions, but could you try and get them to channel them through you so that we're not fending off 400 emails every week?
Thank you very much indeed. That's been very good. If we could go to item 9 now, calendar of meetings, or is there anything else that we have left to attend to, Lindsay?
Calendar of meetings previously agreed. The venues are listed within the agenda as well for your information.
And item, oh, hold on, there is something I've got written on my little list here. Yes, a little bit of AOB. Right, tomorrow, as we've been sorry, I'm a day ahead. Sorry, it's just on Wednesday, the 12th of September, 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock, adult social care services at the Bournemouth Learning Centre. Again, please cascade to other members who are concerned and interested. And the 25th of October, I believe that's also at the same venue, is it? Yes, Bournemouth Learning Centre, and that'll be the 25th of October on children's services. So if you can't make it, you can always ask Councillor Wakefield for advice. I understand he's very good at that sort of thing. Please do encourage attendance around other members so that they can also assist in this, and particularly for yourselves, so that you can take an active role. Before I finish, I will hand over to my Vice Chair in case there's anything you might wish to say.
No, I think I'm fine, thank you.
Practice that. Over to Lindsay to wrap up the meeting. Thank you.
I think I'm also fine, thank you.
Well, thank you all very much, members and officers, for attending, and it's been a very worthwhile meeting, and look forward to seeing you in October. Take care and have a safe journey home. Good night.